Oftentimes, when we introduce one another, we introduce ourselves, we ask the question, what do you do? And of course, in our Western mindset, that goes straight to our profession. We assume what you do is your trade, your skill set, your level of education, your profession, your career. And we put this on our business cards, and this is often very closely linked to our identity. What you do is your profession. And in the Western culture, we consider tasks to be extremely important. We feel like if we haven't accomplished anything in a day or in a week, that is closely tied up to our self-worth. We look down on people who don't seem to accomplish anything, people who just seem to be spiritual or maybe spend a lot of time in nature or perhaps spend their time doing art or things that we don't consider as important as tasks that make money. This is our Western mindset where we associate value and worth with a monetary amount. We put amounts on as a commodity. When you have a piece of land, you want to know how much that land is worth. It's not about the spiritual wealth of that land, about the meaning of something. It's more about its monetary value. For years and years, I served on the conference committee for Volunteers in Mission. Volunteers in Mission is a movement of lay people, ordinary people who go and serve the church going on short-term mission trips. These trips can go anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks, and people often travel outside their hometown and go to some far-off community to serve, and there's often a task associated with such a trip. Groups of Christians gather and often get on an airplane and go sometimes to another country, and the host site, the host church, gives a task to the volunteer and mission team. It could be to build a church. It could be to repair a church. It could be to do vacation Bible school for that local church. But there's always a task associated. If a volunteer and mission team just would go and accompany and sit with the people, learn from the people that they're serving, it wouldn't feel like a mission trip. What would you take a picture of? When you return home, what would you say that you accomplished? So these volunteer and mission teams are very task-oriented. They go in order to accomplish something. They like to be able to take pictures before and after the project is completed in order to come home and say, we went on this mission trip and we accomplished X, Y, and Z. This is very much a part of the Western mindset of being task-oriented. Sometimes we feel that we didn't accomplish anything if we just went and sat with the people and learned about their lives, learned about their ministry, learned about their culture, their context, and just gleaned some spiritual wisdom from that other culture, from that other community. We feel like that is time wasted. We feel like we spent all those resources to go there. We should accomplish something. This is very much about the Western mindset. And Martha was a worrywart. She was so nervous about getting everything perfect, everything right, accomplishing all those tasks, that she couldn't enjoy Jesus' presence. She didn't have the presence of mind to just sit and listen and take in Jesus' teaching, Jesus' wisdom. In our culture, in our context, we have a lot of people who are worrywarts, who suffer from anxiety. There are people who suffer from panic attacks because they imagine what is happening next, and it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a calamity. And they get so worked up about what could go wrong that they break down and they cannot function. We also have illnesses that are called psychosomatic. Psychosomatic comes from two root words, psycho meaning the mind, and soma meaning the body. And the mind actually creates physical ailments in our body. For example, an ulcer. An ulcer is created not through the body, but through the mind that worries so much that the juices in our intestinal system bore a hole inside the lining of the stomach that creates a physical illness with the source being in the mind. And so when we constantly worry, rather than making things better, we actually make things worse by creating a physical illness in the body. And sometimes people throw up when they're extremely nervous, when they're extremely worried, and they make things worse. Now, I must confess, I worry a lot. I sometimes overthink things. Sometimes when I have an important task ahead of me, I have trouble sleeping. And I can't go to sleep because I'm imagining different scenarios and what I would do in this case and what I would do in that case. I am a perfectionist, and I like things to be done well. I make lists of the different tasks in order to check them off because I want to make sure that I'm dotting all my I's, I'm crossing all my T's, and I want my next project to go well. But Jesus is telling us that Mary chose the better path. That there are moments in life where the most important thing we can do with our time is just to sit and listen to Jesus' wisdom. To take the spiritual path, to be calm, to trust, have faith that everything is going to be okay. This can be difficult. This can be difficult for people who want to do things well, to just trust and have faith that it is going to be okay. A few short weeks ago, on December 19th, my father passed away suddenly in Asheville. So when I got the call that my father had fallen, Deanna and I got in the car and we drove down to Asheville. We got there just a few minutes late. So we still went to the hospital and my father was still lying there in his hospital gown. We don't know exactly the cause of death. We don't know if he had cerebral hemorrhaging or if he fell and that caused the cerebral hemorrhaging. But when we got there, he was peacefully lying in the hospital bed, and we were able to hold his hand. We were able to say a prayer. We were able to read his favorite scripture passage and to say a few moments of gratitude, of special memories that we shared together to give thanks for his life. The hospital chaplain came in and had a few words for us, offered us some empathy and sympathy, and offered offered a word of prayer. And then as we began to do the paperwork to acknowledge my father's death, the chaplain said to us, well, make sure you take any belongings that he had. And we said, well, the paramedics, they took him to the hospital. We don't know what he had. And the chaplain said, well, what was he wearing? Did he have anything with him? And the chaplain said, well, if he had anything, the paramedics would have put it in this room. They usually take a plastic string bag and they put any belongings into that plastic string bag. So we looked around the hospital room, and we couldn't find anything. He didn't have anything with him. He didn't have his shoes. He didn't have a jacket. So the chaplain said, well, if he had any clothes, the paramedics would have cut them open, cut them off, in order to work on his body. So he had no possessions, no clothes, no shoes. He didn't have his wallet. He didn't have his cell phone. He didn't have anything with him. And so as we scanned the room and didn't find any string bag, we noticed on his left hand, he had his wedding ring. So the chaplain said, well, make sure you take that with you. So my brother took off his wedding band, and that was his only earthly possession. He left this earth exactly how he came into it, with nothing. His only and last earthly belonging was his wedding band. And my mother had died 3 years earlier. She died in 2019, and yet he kept on that wedding band as a symbol of commitment, and that was his last earthly possession. That's how life ends. We can't take anything with us. We leave this world just as we enter it. So why do we spend so much time and energy and nervousness worrying about how things are going to turn out, worrying about our task, worrying about tomorrow, if one day we are going to leave this earth exactly how we came into it, with nothing? And it is going to be okay. If you have that peace of Christ in your heart, and you trust and you believe in God and you have faith, then everything is going to be okay. Several years ago, Deanna and I were missionaries in Cuba. And in the summer of 1994, there was a major crisis. Several people started to build rafts, and they started to launch and try to come across the Florida Straits to Miami on unseaworthy rafts. These were made of styrofoam, of inner tubes, of wood, of just about any scrap you could find that would float. They built these rafts, and they just launched themselves across the Florida Straits. Thousands of people died at sea. Thousands of people were eaten by sharks or drowned or died of dehydration. It was an act of desperation as people carried their rafts to the shore and just went out on an adventure, not knowing if they would survive or not. Several Christians went to the shore where these people were launching their crafts and said, don't do it, don't go. And the Christians began to pray with those people before they left and said, don't do it, trust in God. God has a better way. Because if you are so desperate to leave this country, if you're so desperate and you don't feel like you have a future here, that is the opposite of faith. That is despair. That is saying that you don't have any trust in God, that the future will be better. So the very act of taking such a dangerous journey was an act in despair, the opposite of hope, the opposite of faith, the opposite of peace. There's a story about a person who was applying for a new job. And this person was really uncertain about this other opportunity. The person finally got offered this job and wasn't sure if it was the right job to take, if it was the right next step in the person's career, if it was the right next step for the person's family. And so the person talked to the HR director and asked all these questions about the job. What will I do here? Or what will I do there? Or what are the benefits? And what's the salary? And asked all these questions about the position until finally the HR director said, well, are you going to take the job or not? We need to know, because if not, we need to offer it to the next candidate. But the person was so worried about this next step, if it was the right path, it was the next step in the person's career, that they just kept asking these questions. Till finally, the HR director said, there comes a point where no more information will be helpful. You need to know in your heart whether this is the right job for you. Only you can discern that. Only you can figure that out. That's a decision for your heart to have peace that this is the right next step. And so the person agreed that's true. One has to pray. One has to have spiritual guidance. One has to have faith and hope that it is indeed the right step. And no more information is going to sway you whether it's the right or wrong job for you. Ultimately, that's a spiritual question that you need to know in your heart that it is indeed the right next step for you. And so the person took the position and had peace that it was indeed the right step for that time, for that place, for that stage of the person's life. And so ultimately, no more information can help us to gain that peace. That's an inner peace that comes through our trust in God, through our faith, through our hope that we are in the right place at the right time. It becomes a spiritual decision. Now, sometimes we have a very big task ahead of us. We have a very big project, or we have so many problems that they seem insurmountable. And we can worry ourselves to death. We can think about all the things that could go wrong and whether we should do this or whether we should do that. And all the little details, we can go crazy. And this is what Martha was experiencing. She was worried about everything that could go wrong with Jesus' visit, all the preparations that had to take place, and she wanted every little detail to be exactly right. But all of those details and all of those preparations can drive you crazy. And so we need to break things down into smaller steps. We need to have a sense of peace and calm in order to do anything at all. When it becomes so much and such a big project that is so insurmountable, we can worry ourselves to death. Sometimes less is more. Less is more. There is a movement within our society of minimalists, of people who no longer want to get on the wheel of the rat race and just chase people around or try to keep up with the Joneses and just to have so many possessions and try to get a bigger house and a fancier car or to get a boat. Some people are saying, none of that is going to make me happy. And so this movement is of minimalists who feel like all I need, I already have. If I have a roof over my head, if I have clothes to wear for the next day, if I have enough food on the table, I have everything I need. I don't need anything more. There's no need to get in this rat race and just try to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate to try to look or appear that I'm something that I'm not. I am sufficient. If I have the basics, I am good. I have the peace of Christ in my heart, and I have enough. And there are also small houses that people are building that are just like a studio apartment. They're self-contained. They have a little kitchen. They have a little dining area. They have a little sleeping area and a loft. And people are building these mini houses instead of trying to have the 4-bedroom in the suburban house with the car and the garage and everything and all the amenities. These mini houses, miniature houses, are becoming very popular, and people are moving and preferring to have a simple life instead of all of the luxuries of a large house. So sometimes small is better. Sometimes less is more. I find that when I get so nervous and so busy and I have so many tasks ahead of me, that it's better to focus on one task at a time. On one little task and get my concentration and focus on that, and I get my breath under control, and I'm able to accomplish one task at a time. When I was a youth, when I was growing up, when I was in college, I was a football kicker on the football team. And football kickers, it's really more of a mental task than it is a physical task. You practice kicking over and over again. You practice kicking on your own. And so you know you can do it. But when you get in the game, you have a lot of distractions. You have the fans in the crowd that are clapping, that are booing, that are singing, that are yelling. You have the two teams. You have a lot of distractions. And so what I try to do is to focus on the minimal things, on the little things. I would just look at a blade of grass. That's all it is, a blade of grass. I would just focus on one little spot and aim for one little spot. And when you focus on the little things, you get your breathing under control, you learn to concentrate, and you can focus, and then everything comes into play. Sometimes less is more. Now, there's a practice that's been very common now. It's becoming common in schools. It's been becoming common in self-help circles. It's become common in group therapy. That's called mindfulness. Mindfulness actually is a spiritual practice. In the Middle Ages, in convents, people practiced mindfulness. It's a sense of spiritual centering. It's a breath prayer where all you do is focus on your breathing. And sometimes there's a phrase that you say over and over again as you breathe. As you breathe in, as you exhale, you focus on a breath prayer, which is just something very easy, very simple, like Christ is with me. Christ is with me. And people repeat this breath prayer like a mantra as they breathe in and as they exhale. And it's through this mindfulness, through simple breathing exercises where we slow down our lives, and that is when we learn to focus. So Mary chose the better path. She chose to just sit and listen to Jesus. And Jesus, when he was challenged by Martha, to tell Mary to get up and start doing things, Jesus said no. Mary has chosen the better path. Mary was just sitting at Jesus' feet, listening, absorbing this spiritual wisdom, and through that simple life, Mary had the peace of Christ. And she didn't worry, she didn't suffer from endless thoughts about what could go wrong. She was just sitting at Jesus' feet, absorbing this spiritual knowledge, and she had the peace of Christ. So next time you find yourself getting worried, going through insomnia, worrying about what could go wrong, remember this passage. And Jesus said that what Mary has chosen is the right path. Live simply, breathe, have faith in Christ, that everything is going to be okay. May God bless you.